Please join me in singing our opening hymn, number 1011, Return Again. Welcome to the Community Church of Chapel Hill, Unitarian Universalist. My name is Susan McDaniel. I am a member of the Worship Associates Ministry here at our church. I want to welcome each of you to our online Sunday service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you came to worship with us today, you are welcome here. Today's chalice lighting words are by Eric Heller Wagner. Blessed is the fire that burns deep in the soul. It is the flame of the human spirit touched into being by the mystery of life. It is the fire of reason, the fire of compassion, the fire of community, the fire of justice, the fire of faith. It is the fire of love burning deep in the human heart, the divine glow in every life. This morning's reading is adapted from a sermon by the Reverend Charles M. at the 1959 building dedication of the Community Church of Chapel Hill. We are a generation of house builders, and we recognize the difference between a house and a home. This building will be a church home to the extent to which restless human minds can join in the reverent, sincere, and humble search for the sacred, and all that it means to human life and its relationships, where all sorts and conditions of people, of all genders and ages, may come and share joy and sorrow, hope and fear, doubt and faith, achievement and failure, where it is greatly and fully used for all the needs of all the people, with marks left by children and a door that is opened wide and often, where there is loving and creative controversy within the church family and with the wider community, with a common aspiration to respond to the truths that we know and to the light that is given to us.
Life begins to happen when I plan something else, trying to be somebody, but all I got was someone else. My plan's always changing, always rearranging. No, slow down, release control, slow and steady, let me know. Life begins to happen when I plan something else, trying to be somebody, but all I got was someone else. My plan's always changing, always rearranging. No, slow down, release control, slow and steady, let me know. The hardest place to be is right where you are, in the space between the finish and the start is the arrow in your heart. Arrow in your heart. Now I'm restless, running from the present. I know my mind's been cheating, thinking that I will arrive. My plan's always changing, always rearranging. No, slow down, release control, slow and steady, let me know. The hardest place to be is right where you are, in the space between the finish and the start is the arrow in your heart. Arrow in your heart. Arrow in your heart. Arrow in your heart. I'm fast and I'll end up exhausted, out of breath thinking where I went wrong. This heart is afraid to beat slowly, miss a chance at what I could become. I know that I can't run forever, but I can't stand still for too long. This heart is afraid to beat slowly. Ooh. The hardest place to be is right where you are, in the space between the finish and the start is the arrow in your heart. Arrow in your heart.
Each week, we hold in our service time for sharing the joys and the sorrows of this community. This past week, several members of the church reached out to me asking me to place stones for their joys, as well as for their sorrows. The first two stones this morning were asked to be placed by Becky Wilkes. Becky says, first of all, she wants to express her joy at being able to hold driveway visits and email and call her parents on a regular basis. They're doing well, living in their house out near Saxapahaw, and Becky is feeling grateful for their health. Becky also writes, I am a bit worried about our youngest, at 19, a rising junior at UNC Asheville. living in an apartment next to campus, but struggling with existential questions and a sense of purpose, heading into uncertain and uncomfortable semester ahead. Becky asks that we please hold all our young college students struggling to grow up in these uncertain times in our thoughts as they struggle to find a way in the world. Brenda Rogers asked me to place a stone. She says she has a joy that her mother, Dot Hyde, celebrated her 100th birthday on July 21st. However, due to the coronavirus, the party with daughters, grandsons, and their families and cousins had to be held over Zoom. Brenda writes that her mother is in assisted living in Asheville and is still mentally sharp, and Brenda hopes to be able to visit her soon. Valerie Vickers asked me to place a stone. Valerie writes that it's with mixed emotions that she and Paul Mitchell announced that they will be moving to Matthews, North Carolina, out near Charlotte, in the next couple of weeks in order to be closer to family. Valerie says, "We have been embraced by this church community and found places to share our gifts in a meaningful way." Valerie writes, "We plan to continue Zooming with all of us here and appreciate our thoughtful support as they make this move." A final stone is placed this morning for all those joys and sorrows that we hold in our hearts that were not spoken. I would invite us to pray together amidst the joys and the sorrows of this community, amidst these challenging times. May we find the courage to resist fear, resist falsehood, resist cynicism and despair. In these challenging times, may we look to our past for inspiration. May we be reminded how this church displayed both moral leadership and moral followership, following the lead of the most vulnerable. May we be reminded by how we helped to bring about significant change in our community and world. May we be stirred by the overcoming of fear and by the power of conscience. In these challenging times, may we ourselves find our voice. We have the courage to speak out, resisting falsehood with truth. May we be stirred to lives of justice, lives of service, lives of goodness. Amidst all our joys and sorrows, amidst all our cares and concerns, may we be held. Amen. And blessed be.
I knew this roses
One of my joys at this church is how every summer around this time, our church offices are taken over for a couple of days for the assembling of a number of backpacks with school supplies for children in our community. This morning's Share the Plate is to benefit our Backpack Back to School program, and our Share the Plate words come from Terry Brooks. Terry writes, "In Chatham and Orange counties last year, 6,000 children were living below the poverty line. This number is only growing due to the pandemic. And children beginning school online this year still need school supplies. Backpacks and school supplies are often not top budget priorities for families living with such a small income. Your donations to today's Share the Plate will allow us to purchase backpacks and fill them with requested supplies. Last year, our church raised almost $2,000. This worked out to 150 backpacks, which we divided between Orange and Chatham counties. Thank you for your generosity today. Helping students get a good start on the school year is important work. And Terry's reached out to our contacts in both Chapel Hill and Chatham County, who tell her that the backpacks are still very much desired and that grade-appropriate supplies are still important for children to receive. If you wish to give to this morning's Share the Plate for our church's Back to School Backpack program, you can do that using the giving portal below. Select Share the Plate, or if sending a check to the church, just send a check to the church and write Share the Plate in the memo line. Thank you for your generosity as we receive for this morning's Share the Plate collection. Thank you.
I love this church. That much should be obvious by now. So, when my Unitarian Universalist history professor assigned us to study a moment in history of a particular UU congregation, it was obvious which one I would pick. And today I want to share some of what I learned over the course of that semester, studying the origins of this congregation. I sought out to exactly understand how the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Chapel Hill came to exist, and discovered with gratitude the rich life and wisdom of our first minister, Reverend Charles Jones. He is at the center of this story, and I believe that his memory still has things to teach us as a community. So first I want to give you a summary. Charles Miles Jones was born in 1906 in Nashville, Tennessee, to a Presbyterian mother and an atheist father. For the most part, he was uninterested in church until he was working a stint in a cafe in San Antonio and started working as a musician for a minister at a Presbyterian church there. Though he was a college dropout, he was still admitted to Union Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, where he met his wife Dorcas and launched a career as a respectable Southern Presbyterian minister. In Chapel Hill, his ministry blossomed. Throughout World War II and the following decade, he spent his days as a popular preacher, mentor, and confidant to UNC students, and he was a subtle disruptor in the early days of the movement for desegregation. In this work, he made a lot of friends and a handful of enemies. His peripheral involvement in hosting an interracial picnic in 1944 even warranted him a file in the U.S. War Department. This incident led to the first instance of congregants petitioning for Jones's removal from the University Presbyterian Church. These disgruntled folks wrote that they needed a minister who could heal divides rather than stir up trouble as they thought Jones was doing. The session, Presbyterian's version of the church board, defended Jones unequivocally. It was a non-issue. And so he continued his work. In 1947, Reverend Jones supported a group of black and white activists with the Fellowship of Reconciliation, who were going on a journey through the South to put to test new court rulings that desegregated interstate bus lines. After the group returned from their lunch at the Presbyterian Manse, a fight erupted at the bus station over their work, and Jones had to personally drive the group to Greensboro so they could make their next bus. He received death threats and was the subject of a town-wide meeting. If he wasn't notorious yet, this was the moment where he gained a public image as an agitator on issues of race. Under Jones's leadership, the congregation of Franklin Street flourished. It grew so large that congregants began to petition their regional council for funding to open a second Presbyterian church in the area. These well-meaning congregants appeared to have no personal problem with him, but this action was the catalyst for his removal from his position. It is a myth that Charles Jones ever had to undergo a heresy trial. I heard that from a lot of people growing up. But the commission that investigated him only informally grilled him on theology, and the presbytery denied appeals asking that he be given a fair heresy trial. In 1952, to mostly dismay within his congregation, Jones was removed from his post for an array of faults, including improper baptismal record keeping, informal ordination of elders and deacons, and theology that, quote, has had the practical effect of making doctrines appear to be the product of human efforts, and of making God someone to be sought and found. Dangerous theology. Though he was technically left in good standing with the Presbyterian Church, it is another myth that Charles Jones was defrocked. After a Time magazine article on the incident, Jones was getting more media attention than he ever had before, and tons of fan mail along with it. This is what makes up the majority of his archive in Wilson Library. But he actually spent the next year living pretty quietly with his family in his beloved second home of Southern Appalachia, working with a nonprofit to improve the conditions of rural schools. Back in Chapel Hill, a community was forming around the idea of a new church, unbound by doctrine and denominational strictures. So, on August 16, 1953, a little over a year later, Charles Jones preached the first sermon of the Community Church of Chapel Hill in a room on campus. He served this congregation for the next 13 years and helped us start the journey to become who we are today. From his letters and sermons, I've compiled a few important lessons from Charles Jones that I believe are just as relevant today as ever. So, here's lesson 1 on ministry, or the role of a church. Reverend Charles Jones was simply a good minister. I do believe this. I have learned from him on my own vocational journey, and I believe his ministerial style can be informative for anyone who is a part of leading and caring for this faith community. First, he understood that Chapel Hill is a special place. It is a college town with close access to robust urban and rural communities. What happens in the wider world is felt here, and there are kind and smart people everywhere willing to experience life together. Campus ministry was a crucial part of Jones's ministry, and this is why he came back. The original mission of this church ended with a call to outward service that I see at play today. I am grateful for the ways that I see this congregation engaging beyond our walls with the wider community. Second, Jones taught by word and example that religion in churches must be practically oriented. Early in his career, he received a letter exclaiming that Jones knew how to preach sermons that were engaging and insightful to college professors and Girl Scouts alike. And in the sermon dedicating this congregation's first building, which Susan read a portion of with us this morning, he warned us against becoming a church that concerned itself too much with the danger of kids tracking mud onto the carpet, or a church that created committees just for the sake of creating committees. During this pandemic that we're experiencing now, I believe that Reverend Jones would appreciate our work to adapt and reassess the needs of our community, rather than straining to imitate our preconceived notions of what church is supposed to be. And Reverend Jones taught me that being deeply and openly human makes us better leaders. When offered the position at the community church, he originally declined because he knew he was only one man, and that was not enough to form a community around. And he was known for playing games and writing silly songs with the students he worked with. A poem of remembrance given by some of these students at his memorial service thanks him for reminding us that laughter filled with love can lighten our work and our worship, our joy and our pain. Jones reminds us here that laughter is a spiritual practice. So lesson number 2, on showing up for racial justice. I want to pause here with a caveat. I know that the Reverend Charles Jones was a straight white guy working for desegregation in the middle of the 20th century. He was friends with politicians and business owners, and he did not believe in radicalism to bring about social change. I need to remind you that our context is different than his, and therefore our work should look different as well. He should not be our star model for traveling this path of collective liberation, and today we should be learning the most from Black and brown folks who hold a diversity of identities. So, rather than offering Charles Jones as an example to follow, I want to share with you a few ways that his story taught me about the culture of white supremacy, and hopefully can help teach you so that we can better recognize it in our present circumstances and respond to it. One of the most shocking things for me to learn was that, contrary to the way that we tell it, Jones being kicked out of the pulpit officially had nothing to do with disrupting his anti-racism work, but the subtext is there. It was undeniable that this is a key factor. The Presbytery and the Investigative Commission extensively surveyed church members, grilled church officers on theology, and refused to sign the appointment of Jones's chosen interim minister. All of these were tools to control the narrative and get what they wanted, without appearing to be racist. This commission was created to investigate the need for a new congregation, but used this power as a license to put Jones through a lengthy and bureaucratic process that showed him the way to the door. The official report that asked him to resign stated that it would be for the welfare of the church. You'll note this kind of language mirrors earlier petitions that demand Jones work to heal the gaps. Language like this, asking for unity but not addressing the common root of the issue, is a really common tactic of people who are actively working to uphold the status quo when it comes to race. Furthermore, early meeting minutes of the commission indicate that denominational leaders did not believe that they could raise money for a second church if Jones was in the pulpit because he was so widely known for his views on race. Put bluntly, his removal was a way for the Presbytery to appease their more openly racist base so as to have access to that money. So, how do we respond to this culture of white supremacy that we live in? Especially for those of you who are white like me, we need to be asking ourselves, how should we live when our jobs and social status might be threatened by us speaking up against racism? We, like Jones, have something to lose in this fight, and we need to acknowledge that. So, Charles Jones did the work anyway. Quietly and humbly, he hosted Black speakers and artists from out of town, attended sit-ins, and had hard conversations with his friends in power. He didn't identify as a radical, but he understood that we need diverse people using diverse tactics in order to lead us to a more just world. I don't think that I yet know how to do this well. Often these days I worry if I'm doing enough, or if I might mess up and embarrass myself when going further into the work of dismantling racism. One undated sermon from his archive is really helping me brace for that discomfort. The sermon is titled Failure. In it, he writes, "A human being cannot bear the burden of their own perfection. If they seek to, they become mired in a swamp of pretense. Perfection is foreign to the human situation. Because of the pretense that we cannot relax or enjoy or trust other people. When we can admit our imperfections frankly, without shame that makes for deceit, we can remain responsive to the higher visions and impulses that come to us. If one is afraid of imperfection, they will be immobilized." I hope that hearing this will help you, too, resist the pull towards immobilization for the journey ahead. This brings us to lesson 3, on getting through difficult times. For this history project, I did focus a large portion of my research on the period of time between Charles Jones first coming under investigation by the Presbyterian Commission and the Sunday service inaugurating the Community Church of Chapel Hill. This is largely because it was a time in Charles Jones's life that amassed a great deal of archival material to work with. Also, it was a time of heated controversy and seemingly insurmountable uncertainty, making it interesting to study as a moment in history. This time period spans exactly 14 months and 3 days, and this was a defining time of liminality in the life of Charles Jones, his family, and the community around him. In our current time of heated controversy and seemingly insurmountable uncertainty, I believe that Jones has some wisdom to offer us. Notably, Jones really used his time well. He lived a quiet life in the mountains, enjoying time with his family and being of service the best way he knew how. From the way his letters from this time have been meticulously preserved, you get a sense that he let the news from the outside world wash over him and inform his actions without letting himself stray too far into despair. He corresponded with colleagues, offering them the bare facts of his situation and admitting that he didn't know where life would take him. He graciously received advice from others while allowing this to be a time of deep and serious discernment to lead him to make decisions for himself. He even declined a few impressive job offers just because he needed more time to process what was happening. And thankfully, this discernment led him to us. But it wasn't an obvious, straightforward decision for him. In a letter he wrote shortly before agreeing to be the first minister of this new denominational church, he talks about this struggle. He wrote to a friend about the difficulty of the Presbyterian decision, but he added an important note of hope. He said, "I am not discouraged, however. I have discovered during my 20 years of ministry that the things that I thought were happening for the worst usually opened up other opportunities if one kept alive to them." In this, I do not think that Jones was trying to give this moment a vague spiritual bypass of the everything happens for a reason variety. Rather, he is saying that even in the times that feel hardest, there is still opportunity to be found. If we keep our senses awake and allow ourselves to fully experience these moments of uncertainty, transformation for good is possible. Maybe even these are the moments in which we are most able to imagine transformation. No amount of social or political change could reduce the pain we're experiencing this year to a necessary evil ultimately for our own good. Still, we can find these days of pandemic and uprising full of blessings that come with slowing down and shifting perspective. We can pause and imagine, what next? Who do we want to be when we come out of this? What kind of a world do we want to live in? There are opportunities, and right now our task is keeping ourselves alive to them. So in closing, I want these 3 lessons to serve as a blessing on their own. A reminder of the ways that we can carry on the memory and the work of Reverend Charles Jones. As we leave this time of worship and community, may we honor the gift that this community is, and remember that laughter filled with love can lighten our loads. In our going out in this world, working to recognize and dismantle systems of white supremacy at play in our world, may we not be immobilized by fear of imperfection. And for us white people, may we do the work, even when it means giving up positions of power. In our witnessing to this collective moment that COVID-19 has drawn us into, may we slow down to discern what is calling to us and begin to imagine a future transformed for the better. May it be so. Amen.
There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days.
Let the waves wash over
There will be better
me.
days. There will be better days.
Let the waves wash
days.
Let's always wash over
There will be better days. There will be better days.
Let's always wash over
There will be better
me.
days. There will be better days.
I am already under.
There will be better days.
Let's always wash over me.
There will be better days. There will be better days.
Let's always wash over me.
Better days. There will be better days.
Let's always wash over me.
There will be better days.
I am already under.
There will be better days.
Let's always wash over me.
Better days. There will be 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 better days.
There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better days. There will be better
There will be better days. There will be better days.
Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, God of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before thee, hail thee as the sun above. Melt the clouds of sin and sadness, drive the pain of doubt away. Giver of immortal gladness, fill us with the joy of day. All thy works with joy surround the earth and reflect thy rays. Stars and planets sing around thee, center of unbroken praise. Field and forest, vale and mountain, blossoming meadows, flashing sea, chanting bird and flowing fountain, call us to rejoice in thee. Thou art giving and forgiving, ever blessing, ever blessed. The spring of the joy of living, ocean depth of happy rest. Ever singing, march we onward, victors in the midst of strife. Joyful music lifts us onward in the triumph song.
Now, I want to encourage you to close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Whether you've been a member here for 50 years, or if this is your first service with the community church, I ask you to rest for a moment and feel the energy of this community. Reaching out across time, across space, think about what this community means to you. Charlie Jones was one of the early leaders of this church who are now our spiritual ancestors. They lovingly worked to build a church home for us and for our children, and to help us be of service in the world beyond the walls of a physical church building. May our hearts be filled with gratitude for them, for those whose names we know and those who worked more quietly. In all of our comings and goings, in our work, in this community, and in the wider world, may we strive to honor their memory. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.